The air inside the Australian Signals Directorate was a sterile, refrigerated hum, a climate designed not for people, but for the delicate silicon brains that were the true inhabitants of the building. For Aiden Miller, this was his natural habitat. His world was one of pure logic, of elegant code and flawless mathematics, a sanctuary from the messy and illogical world outside. Tonight, Canberra slept under a blanket of stars, but in Aiden's windowless sector, the only light came from the cool blue glow of his monitor, painting his focused face in an otherworldly hue. A routine alert had flashed on his console an hour ago. A single, almost imaginary anomaly in the performance logs of the Vulcan 700. The machine was a cryptographic fortress, a hulking black obelisk of American engineering that guarded Australia's most vital secrets. The log showed a discrepancy smaller than a heartbeat skip, a nanosecond delay in the generation of its random seed. To anyone else it was a ghost, a digital hiccup to be ignored. But to Aiden, a man who believed in the absolute truth of a well-written algorithm, it was a splinter in the mind, an imperfection that offended his sense of order. His fingers danced across the keyboard, a conductor before an orchestra of code. He dove deep, past the user interface, past the standard protocols, into the machine's soul, its firmware. For hours, it was a river of clean, commented logic. Then he saw it. Not a flaw, but a pattern. A sequence of instructions so cleverly woven into the fabric of the system that it was nearly invisible. It wasn't clumsy or accidental. It was a masterpiece of deception. This code created a hidden mathematical relationship, a secret door within the unbreakable wall of encryption. Anyone who knew of its existence could simply walk through and read every secret the machine was built to protect. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, flooded Aiden's veins. This was intentional. This was a backdoor. He called over his supervisor, a pragmatic man named Davies, whose world was built on chains of command, not chains of code. Aiden tried to explain, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and panic, pointing at the damning lines on the screen. Davies sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an over-imaginative subordinate. Aiden, it's American gear. The best. It's been audited a dozen times. You're chasing a phantom. Probably a hardware glitch. Log it, and for God's sake, go home. The dismissal was a physical weight on Aiden's shoulders, but he couldn't let it go. The ghost was now a constant whisper in his ear. Driven by an obsession he no longer fought, he spent the next 2 hours buried in the digital archives, pulling maintenance records from the 1980s when the Vulcan series was first installed. And there it was, a buried memo, a single line in a 1,000-page report, noting minor synchronization deviations. The official cause was listed as atmospheric interference, the same ghost, a different decade. The implication was a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a campaign. For over 20 years, every strategic dispatch, every shared intelligence report with allies, every secret of the nation had potentially been laid bare. The trust his country placed in its most powerful ally was a lie. A cold fury replaced the dread. He couldn't just log it. He had to prove it. It was an instinct, a need for a tangible piece of the truth. It was a violation of a dozen protocols, but the compulsion was too strong. He inserted a small, unmarked USB drive into his terminal. His plan was simple, justifiable in his mind. Take a fragment of the code, a sample, for offline analysis. As the drive whirred, copying a few kilobytes of data, He watched the progress bar fill. The moment the transfer completed, his main monitor flickered. Not a power surge. A clean, deliberate blackout. For exactly 1 second. The screen returned, his code editor exactly as he left it. But then, his eyes darted to the lower right corner of the screen, to the system tray where background applications lived. For a fraction of a second, a new icon appeared. A simple, unadorned, gray circle. It pulsed with a soft, almost gentle light once, and then vanished. Aiden's blood turned to ice, his breath caught in his throat. He stared at the empty space where the icon had been. It wasn't a glitch. It was a signal, a wave. He slowly, carefully reached out and ejected the USB drive, his heart hammering against his ribs. The small device felt suddenly heavy, radioactive. He was not a hunter discovering a trail. He was a mouse that had just accidentally tapped on the glass of its own cage and seen a shadow move on the other side. The system was not just compromised. It was awake. It was aware of him. And now it knew his name. The sterile air of the ASD facility now felt thin, suffocating. Every hum of a server rack, every distant click of a keyboard, sounded like an accusation. Aiden sat frozen, the unmarked USB drive burning a hole in his palm. The gray circle icon hadn't just been a warning. It had been an introduction. He was no longer alone in the digital dark. His mind, a precision instrument trained for logic, was now racing through terrifying new protocols. They know. They saw the data access. They saw the unauthorized transfer. The they was no longer an abstract concept of a foreign agency. It was a living, breathing entity that had just made eye contact with him from across the digital abyss. He had to know more. He had to understand the scale. The initial shock solidified into a cold, hard determination. He couldn't go to Davies. He couldn't go to anyone. The system itself was compromised, and he had no way of knowing who within it could be trusted. This was now his personal mission, a secret war fought in the silent corridors of code. He waited. The clock on his screen read 3:17 a.m. The graveyard shift was skeletal, the building at its most dormant. This was his window. With meticulous care, he began to construct a ghost within the machine. A hidden virtual environment, a sandboxed partition on his workstation that would, in theory, be invisible to the main system's monitoring. It was a risk of monumental proportions, a direct act of insubordination that could end his career. But his career was now the least of his concerns. Inside this digital safe room, he worked. He cross-referenced the cryptographic signature of the back door, the unique mathematical fingerprint of the ghost, against every piece of encrypted American-sourced hardware in the ASD inventory. The results trickled in, each one a hammer blow. It wasn't just the Vulcan 700 in his sector. It was the secure terminals in the diplomatic liaison office. It was the backup communication arrays. It was the machines installed a decade ago and the ones installed last year. The ghost was a pandemic. It had infected the very central nervous system of Australian intelligence. And then he found the keyword. Buried in a fragment of the code, a string of characters that was not a command, but a label. MINERVA. The name felt ancient, powerful, and utterly menacing. He entered it into his private search, scouring internal databases, declassified archives, and finally, a dark web index of leaked intelligence documents that he accessed through a series of anonymizing relays. The fragments of information that coalesced painted a picture that stole his breath. MINERVA wasn't just a program. It was an operation. References, whispers really, pointed to its existence for decades. A systematic compromise of encryption systems provided to allies. Not just Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, the entire Five Eyes alliance blinded in one eye. The sheer, audacious scale of the betrayal was incomprehensible. This wasn't espionage. This was colonization of trust. His terminal pinged, a soft, normal sound that now felt like a gunshot. It was an internal message. From Jane Reed. Jane was a legend, a veteran analyst from the analog era, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. She was also known for being sidelined, a Cassandra whose warnings about over-reliance on American tech had been ignored for years. Her message was brief, devoid of any official subject line. Miller, your late-night queries are pinging system audit flags. The Vulcan 700 diagnostic. My office. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Panic flared. Was this it? Was she the compliance officer, here to reel him in? Or was she something else? He had no choice. He wiped his virtual session, pocketed the USB drive, and walked the empty, fluorescent-lit corridors. Each step echoed. He felt exposed, a bug under a microscope. Jane's office was an anomaly, a cave of paper files and old books in a world of flat screens. She didn't look up as he entered, her eyes fixed on a dense text. She was in her late 50s, with a severity that could cut glass. She finally lifted her gaze, and her eyes were not those of an administrator. They were the eyes of a fellow hunter. I read your initial log, she said, her voice low and steady. Davies dismissed it. He's a fool. She leaned forward, her chair creaking. But you didn't stop there, did you? You went digging. You found the name. Aiden could only nod, his throat dry. Jane's expression was grim. MINERVA. She whispered the name like a curse. I've been chasing its shadow for 15 years. You just stumbled into a war, son. A silent, cold war that we've been losing since before you were born. She opened a drawer and pulled out a faded physical photograph. It showed a man in a dated suit, smiling awkwardly. His name was Alistair Peck, my mentor, the smartest man I ever knew. In 1992, he found what you found. He took his concerns upstairs. He was found dead in his apartment 2 days later. A single gunshot wound, ruled a suicide. She slid the photo back into the drawer, the sound final and heavy. They killed him for this, Aiden. They. And now they know about you. The walls of Jane Reed's office seemed to contract, absorbing her words. They killed him. And now they know about you. It wasn't a hypothesis anymore. It was a death sentence, delivered in a calm, weathered tone. Aiden felt the world tilt, the solid ground of his reality turning to quicksand. The code was no longer an abstract enemy. It had a body count. Jane's gaze was analytical, dissecting his fear. Panic is a luxury we can't afford, Miller. It makes you predictable. Right now, their response will be procedural. They'll isolate you, discredit you, make you look unstable. They won't send a sniper, not yet. They prefer accidents or suicides. Her cold, brutal assessment was somehow grounding. It was a plan, a terrible one, but a plan nonetheless. We need to get ahead of them, she continued, locking her desk drawer. We need to pull the thread, and we need to do it now, before they sever it. She handed him a small, encrypted burner phone. This is our channel, nothing else. Assume every other system, every email, every landline is a microphone for the other side. Their strategy was born of desperation. They would work in parallel, a digital and an analog attack. Aiden, from his terminal, would use his newfound access and Jane's old clearance codes, still active due to bureaucratic oversight, to dive deeper into the MINERVA architecture. His goal was to find the key, the unique identifier that proved the backdoor was a deliberate creation of the NSA, and not just a theoretical vulnerability. Jane would work the human side. She still had contacts, old friends in journalism and in the less conventional branches of government. She would find a way to exfiltrate their evidence, to get it into hands that could wield it as a weapon. For the next 36 hours, Aiden became a ghost in the machine, a reflection of the very entity he hunted. He operated from a forgotten maintenance terminal in a sub-basement, a place Jane said was off the books. He watched as the noose began to tighten in the world above. His security clearance was temporarily suspended for a random, routine re-evaluation. His access card failed to open his own office door. A friendly colleague quietly told him that two men in impeccably bland suits had been asking questions about him, expressing concern for his well-being and his recent obsessive focus. Each piece of pressure only hardened his resolve. He was getting closer. He found it buried in a log file from a data exchange with GCHQ in London, a digital signature, a unique string of code that acted as a creator's mark. It was the Made in the USA stamp on the weapon. It was the smoking gun. He sent a one-word message to Jane's burner. Eagle, their code for success. Her reply was swift, a location and a time, a meeting point at a public park overlooking Lake Burley Griffin. They would make the handoff to a journalist she trusted. The night was clear and cold. Aiden arrived early, the USB drive containing the proof feeling like a lead weight in his jacket pocket. The park was mostly empty, the city lights shimmering on the dark water. He saw Jane approaching from the opposite path, her figure a steady, determined silhouette. They met by the water's edge. No words were exchanged. He reached into his pocket. The world erupted in light and sound. Twin beams of high-intensity headlights sliced through the darkness from a black SUV that had been sitting dormant, its engine now roaring to life. It wasn't a covert surveillance team. It was an interception squad. They had been waiting. "Run!" Jane's voice was a raw, torn command. She didn't run with him. Instead, she turned and walked directly toward the advancing SUV, her hands raised, not in surrender, but in defiance. She was creating a diversion, a wall of flesh and bone against 2 tons of metal. Aiden froze for a heart-stopping second watching her. Then instinct took over. He sprinted away from the water into the sparse tree line. He heard the SUV's doors slam open, angry shouts, and then the screech of tires as the vehicle swerved around Jane and came after him. His heart hammered against his ribs, his breath ragged in the cold air. He was a lab rat, suddenly exposed in a vast, open arena. He could hear the engine gunning behind him, the headlights painting his fleeing shadow long and distorted on the grass. He cut a sharp left down a steep embankment toward a pedestrian underpass. The SUV couldn't follow. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the concrete tunnel. He burst out the other side into a residential street and found a second black sedan waiting for him, its engine purring. The door opened. A man in a dark overcoat stepped out. It was Johnson, the affable attaché from the U.S. Embassy. His face was no longer friendly. It was a cold, professional mask. "Mr. Miller?" Johnson's voice was calm, almost bored. "This is the end of the road. Give me the drive." and we can forget this unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened. Aiden backed away, his mind screaming. He was trapped. The park at his back, Johnson in front of him. He clutched the USB drive in his sweaty palm. Suddenly, a different engine, older and rougher, roared into the quiet street. A beat-up Holden Commodore swerved around the corner, its headlights off. It screeched to a halt between Aiden and Johnson. The passenger door flew open. "Get in!" a voice yelled from the driver's seat. It was Jane. Without thinking, Aiden dove into the car. The door slammed shut as Jane stomped on the accelerator, the car lurching forward and forcing Johnson to leap aside. Aiden looked back, seeing the man's furious face recede into the darkness, already speaking into a comms device. He turned to Jane, gasping. "How did you—" She cut him off, her eyes fixed on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I told you, they prefer accidents." She gestured to the bleeding gash on her forehead. "They tried to run me down. Their mistake was using a civilian vehicle. Old steel beats new plastic." She glanced at him, her expression grim. "They're not trying to recruit you anymore, Aiden. They're trying to erase you. We just became the most wanted people in our own country." The beat-up Holden Commodore was a ghost, weaving through the pre-dawn industrial outskirts of Canberra. The initial adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep chill and the metallic taste of pure fear. Jane drove with a grim, mechanical precision, her eyes constantly flicking between the road and the mirrors. The gash on her forehead had crusted over, a dark, ugly mark of the new reality. "We can't run forever," Aiden said, his voice hoarse. He was clutching the USB drive so tightly the plastic casing threatened to crack. "They have everything. Satellites, traffic cameras, license plate recognition." "They have a system," Jane corrected, her tone icy. "And every system has a rival, a competing department, an agency that wants a bigger piece of the pie." She explained their only desperate gambit, the CIA. According to Jane's old-world understanding of interagency turf wars, the CIA's Directorate of Operations would be furious to learn the NSA had been running a decades-long operation that compromised Allied intelligence, potentially burning their own field assets without their knowledge. It was a bet on institutional jealousy. "They won't help us out of principle," she warned, "but they might help us to screw the NSA. We need to get this to a field agent, not a station chief. Someone ambitious enough to see the value in it." Their chance came from the darkest corner of the web. Using a sequence of anonymized servers and encrypted message boards, Jane made contact. The rendezvous was set for an old, decommissioned radar station on the windswept coast south of the city. A perfect place for a quiet meeting or a quiet disappearance. The drive was long and silent, every set of headlights behind them a potential threat. They abandoned the car a mile from the location and approached on foot through scrubland, the roar of the ocean masking their sounds. The radar station was a skeletal ruin against the stormy sky, a monument to a past war. They saw a single figure standing in the shadow of the great dish, collar turned up against the wind. This was their contact. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered in Aiden's chest. They were 10 paces away when the world turned to fire and noise. A high-velocity round tore through the silence, striking Jane in the shoulder. It wasn't a sniper's kill shot. It was a message, a disabling shot. She cried out, spinning and collapsing to the gravel. The figure under the radar dish froze, then melted back into the shadows. A phantom, or perhaps bait itself. Aiden dropped to his knees beside Jane. "No, no, no. Go!" She gritted through teeth clenched in agony. Her hand pressed against the dark stain spreading across her coat. "It's a trap. They herded us here." From the periphery, black-clad figures emerged, moving with coordinated predatory grace. They weren't embassy staff. They were a cleanup crew. Jane's eyes met Aiden's. In them, he saw no fear, only a furious, final determination. With her good arm, she shoved the USB drive back into his hand and then reached into her own coat, pulling out a small, compact pistol. "Run, you fool!" she snarled. "Tell the world!" She then turned and began firing toward the advancing figures, the sharp, loud reports of her pistol, a stark contrast to the suppressed whispers of their weapons. She was creating a wall of sound and lead, a final desperate sacrifice to carve a path for him. Aiden ran. He didn't look back. He heard the suppressed cracks return. 1, 2, then silence. He ran through the scrub, thorns tearing at his clothes, the salt air burning his lungs. He heard the shouts behind him, the dogs being released. He was a rabbit fleeing the hounds. He stumbled down a rocky embankment, losing his footing and tumbling onto a deserted beach. The ocean roared before him, a dead end. He was trapped. He could hear the dogs getting closer. In a final hopeless act, he fell to his knees and began digging in the wet sand with his bare hands, his breath sobbing in his chest. He buried the USB drive, marking the spot with a single sharp piece of driftwood. The evidence was safe. He had failed Jane, but he had not lost the truth. He stood up, turned, and raised his hands as the dark figures and the snarling dogs emerged from the gloom surrounding him. He expected a bullet. Instead, they forced him to his knees and put a black hood over his head. The last thing he heard, spoken in a calm American accent, close to his ear, was, "The asset is secured. The package wasn't on him." In the darkness, a different kind of terror took root. They weren't going to kill him. Not yet. They needed to know what he had done with the proof. His nightmare was just beginning. The world was reduced to a hood of black cloth, the smell of his own fear, and the relentless vibration of an engine. Aiden was in the trunk of a car, his hands bound, every bump on the road jolting through his bruised body. Jane was gone. The certainty of it was a cold stone in his gut. Her final furious act had been for nothing. He had buried the truth in the sand, and now he was being buried alive. The car stopped. Heavy doors slammed. He was pulled out, his legs unsteady on gravel, then concrete. The hood was ripped off. He stood blinking in the harsh fluorescent light of an underground parking garage. He was flanked by two of the black-clad operatives, and standing before him, flanked by a severe-looking woman in a sharp business suit, was Johnson. The embassy attaché's face was no longer a mask of false friendliness or cold anger. It was a slate, wiped clean of any readable emotion. "Mr. Miller," Johnson said, his voice echoing in the sterile space, "you have been extraordinarily inconvenient." They marched him into a service elevator, then into a bland, windowless room that felt neither like a prison cell nor an office. It was a non-place, designed for conversations that would never be recorded. Aiden was forced into a chair. The woman, who had not introduced herself, placed a slim folder on the metal table between them. "We know you retrieved a data fragment from the ASD servers," she began, her voice as crisp as her suit. We know you attempted to make contact with an unauthorized foreign element. We know Jane Reed is deceased. The only variable is the location of the data. You will provide it." Aiden said nothing. His mind, trained for logic, was searching for a flaw in their equation, a variable they had not considered. They had not killed him immediately. That was his only card. Johnson leaned in. "Let me be clear. You are not a prisoner of war. You are not under arrest. You have simply disappeared. The official record will show you resigned from ASD due to stress, after the tragic death of your colleague. There will be an inquiry, of course. It will conclude she was mentally unstable and led you down a dangerous path. A story everyone will be relieved to believe. The horror of it was its elegance. They weren't just going to erase him. They were going to rewrite him. He would become a cautionary tale, a footnote of failure, and Jane a paranoid lunatic. "Give us the drive," the woman said, "and you will be released. You can walk away. You can have your life back." It was the oldest lie in the book, and hearing it now, something in Aiden snapped. The fear burned away, replaced by a cold, clear fury. They had taken everything from him, his career, his faith, his friend. They would not take his silence. He looked Johnson directly in the eye. "Go to hell." Johnson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He gave a slight nod to one of the operatives. The man stepped forward, his intention clear. This was no longer a negotiation. Then a sound. A low, persistent buzz from the intercom on the wall. It was ignored. It buzzed again, more insistently. Johnson frowned, irritated. He walked over and pressed the button. "I said no interruptions." A voice, calm but laced with unmistakable authority, crackled through the speaker. "This is Deputy Director Croft, Australian Secret Intelligence Service. You will stand down, Mr. Johnson. You are operating on Australian soil without jurisdictional authority. The situation has been elevated." Aiden watched as the blood drained from Johnson's face. The woman in the suit stiffened, her eyes darting to the door. It swung open. A new group of men and women entered, their demeanor different. They were not shadows or soldiers. They were bureaucrats, but bureaucrats with the absolute power of the state behind them. The man at their head, Croft, had a weary, resigned expression. "CIA got the memo your people never bothered to send," Croft said to Johnson, his tone dry as dust. "Seems they were rather upset to learn they've been reading compromised intelligence for 2 decades. It creates diplomatic friction." A silent, furious standoff passed between the two groups. The American operatives slowly lowered their weapons. They had been outmaneuvered, not by force, but by a bigger, more ruthless game of politics. Croft turned to Aiden. "Mr. Miller, you will come with us." He was led out of the room, past a seething Johnson. He was not taken to freedom. He was driven to another equally anonymous government building and led into a plush, wood-paneled office. Croft sat behind a large desk, steepling his fingers. "The data, Miller." "Where is it?" Aiden told him about the beach, the driftwood marker. Croft gave another quiet order into his phone. Then he looked back at Aiden. "You understand that none of this can ever become public. The alliance, the partnership with Washington, it is the bedrock of our national security. It is more important than you, more important than Jane Reed, and infinitely more important than the truth." Hours later, a man entered and placed the sand-caked USB drive on Croft's desk. Croft picked it up, examined it, and then slid it into a drawer. locking it. The MINERVA program will be terminated. Quietly. The Americans have given their word, Croft said. In return, you will vanish. You will be given a new identity, a pension, and a life of quiet obscurity. You will never speak of this again. If you do, the narrative we created for you will become your permanent reality. Do you understand? It was not a question. It was the final, non-negotiable term of his surrender. He had won. He had exposed the conspiracy and survived. And his reward was to become a ghost, to carry the weight of a truth that could never be told, in a world that had chosen a comfortable lie over a devastating reality. Aiden Miller, the man who believed in absolute truth, looked at the man who curated lies for a living and gave a single, slow nod. He understood perfectly.